Welcome to my first ever video. I have been asked for tips and tricks on how to make a perfect pie crust, so I thought I would make a video to share that with you. What I have here are some pretty straightforward ingredients. I have all-purpose unbleached flour, butter that is cold and cubed up, some sugar, some sea salt, and some ice water. All right, so I'm going to show you my preferred method to make this, which is with my hands. You can make it in a KitchenAid stand mixer or a food processor also, if you like. So I like this way because I can really feel the dough. So what I'm doing is I'm just starting by pressing all the cubes of butter flat. And then I'm going to stir and toss it with the dry ingredients in my bowl. And then continue to press it, making sort of a pinching motion with my fingertips to work the butter in until it is the size of a pea, or small peas. Okay. The recipe ingredients, the pie crust ingredients for a single crust pie, are 6 1/4 ounces of all-purpose flour. That translates to 1 1/4 cups of all-purpose flour, 1/4 teaspoon of salt, and 1 stick or 4 ounces of cold butter cut into cubes. Okay, so 1/2 inch cubes. Mine are a little smaller because I'm going to be doing this by hand today, but if you're using a machine, the bigger the cubes, the better. All right, so this is going to be a beautifully flaky pie dough. I'm tossing this together. I'm going to get all that other butter in there. I'm going to add my sugar. I always like to add a little bit of sugar to my pie crust. I think it helps to brown the crust a little bit. Sugar is also a dough tenderizer, so it will help with our flaky, tender crust quite a bit. All right, so I know it's a little hard to see inside my metal bowl. I wish I had a glass one for this, but I don't. I'll show you what I'm doing once I get all this in here. Okay, so the amount of water you need, oftentimes a recipe gives you a range of water from 1/4 to 1/3 of a cup, or 1/3 of a cup to 1/2 a cup. And a lot of that variation is because flour has the ability to absorb moisture from the environment. So on a rainy day or a foggy day, if your flour is exposed to the elements, you won't need as much water to get your dough to come together. Also the type of butter. So if you're using a European style butter that has a lower water content and a higher fat content, you will need less ice water, or more ice water depending on the day. I know that sounds kind of confusing at first, but I will show you what I mean when I get there. We just need enough water to hydrate the dough so it holds together. So all-purpose flour contains a protein called gluten, and gluten is what makes our baked goods nice and strong. So it's a protein, and once it gets wet, it starts to form these long bonds, and the more you work it, the stronger those bonds become, and that's what helps our baked goods hold together. So it's going to help hold our pie crust together, but we don't want it to be tough and chewy like a tortilla or bread. We want it to be tender and flaky. So the sugar that I added, that little bit of sugar I added, helps with the tenderness. And the other thing is that's going to help shorten those gluten strands and make this a little more tender also is all this fat in the form of butter that we're working in. So by rubbing the butter between my fingers mixed in with the flour, it helps inhibit those gluten strands from growing long and strong and nice and tight. They'll be shorter and less strong. And the idea of having the butter in flat bits or the size of a pea is that once we start to mix the water in, those gluten strands will start to form, and so we'll have layers of our pie dough, our flour mixed with water, and layers of butter. And then when the dough goes into the oven, so we always want to have a cold dough and a hot oven, so I'll talk about that in a minute. But when this goes into the oven, the dough is cold, the butter is cold, and so what it does is it creates some steam because it's cold butter, into a hot oven creates steam, and that creates little pockets and little layers, and then it melts out. So we'll have layers of dough and layers of butter all mixed together, and that's where those flaky layers come into play. Okay, so if you can see this now, I have my butter. It's all smashed pretty flat or broken up into small bits. And now I'm going to add the water, the ice water, because I want it to be nice and cold. So up to 2/3 of a cup of water, which is a lot. I don't think I'm going to need that much. Okay, so just working it, making sure nothing's too big. But those big pieces of butter, when we roll out the dough, will get worked into there as well. So as long as you have a sandy looking mass like this, it looks a little bit like cornmeal, a little bit more yellow. I know the light's not good in here today because it's a little bit cloudy. Okay, so my ice water, I have ice cubes in there. I'm starting with about just slightly under 8 ounces of very cold water. I'm going to start with a little bit, and I'm going to stir and toss it with my hands till all the flour's coated. And it's starting to look a little clumpy already. You can see that in there. And then, but it's not coming together into a cohesive dough, but that's okay. So I'm going to show you what we're looking for. If you add too much water, your dough will get either tough or it'll be sort of soupy, and then it's hard to manage and roll out. So just enough water, to hydrate the dough. And then the way to test it to see if I've added enough water, even though it's not being held together, it's not holding together yet, but to check it, you grab a handful of dough and you give it a big squeeze, okay? So if you squeeze it and your dough is holding together like this, there's enough water in there, okay? So there is a little floury layer in there, so instead of pouring more water in there and accidentally overhydrating my dough, I'm gonna go ahead and just sprinkle a little bit in there. Stir and toss it together. Just a little bit more. Just like that. And now I'm going to press it all together into a mass and put it in the refrigerator for 30 minutes to rest. I'll show you what the finished product looks like before I shut the camera off. At any point, if I decide that it's still a little too crumbly down here, maybe that was at the bottom of my bowl, so maybe it's a little bit crumbly, I'm going to flick a little bit more water onto the dry bits. Okay, just like that. And then wrapping this up in some plastic wrap and putting it in the fridge for 30 minutes will help the flour hydrate. It'll absorb the moisture that we just added in the form of water, and if there's a little bit of moisture in the butter, it'll absorb that, and it will make a nice, beautiful dough that's easy to roll out. So to wrap it up and put it in the fridge, what we're going to do is we're going to flatten it into a disc, okay? Because if you put it into the fridge to get to hydrate and to rest in the shape of a softball or a football, when you go to roll it out, you're going to be rolling out this giant ball. This way, it's already where I want it to be. It's also going to cool faster. Okay, so that's it for part 1.